Okay, trying again. Cool. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the data conference, and thanks for attending our session. We're going to be talking about metadata and the semantic layer. So hi, my name's Alexis Pubble. I'm with Enterprise Technology. I lead the data success team, which just means my team owns all of the products for business intelligence across the university. So if any of you guys use the analytics portal, Alteryx, Tableau, Power BI, all of that kind of falls under my team's umbrella.
I'm Josh. I'm an AI acceleration under ET, and I lead the data enrichment and architecture chapter there. And we build some stuff in the warehouse that you guys may or may not use.
All right, so we have a jam-packed agenda for you guys in this 50 minutes. So we're going to start with the house of data, describe what metadata is, what's it good for, get into a data maturity model, semantic layer, the analytics portal, some of the enrichment work that Josh and team has been working on, open metadata, AI and machine learning, and then how can you guys get your hands on some metadata and contribute. So let's talk about this analogy we're going to be consistently referring back to throughout our presentation, which is the house of data. So at the bottom, you see kind of our supporting foundational elements, which are people. So this is things like data stewards, analysts, anyone who's contributing. We have our processes. This includes things like getting access as well as some of the enrichment and ETL work going on. And then we have the actual data. So these are the foundational elements of the house. But then we get into the supporting infrastructure, right? And that's going to be, kind of the most of this presentation is going to get into the supporting infrastructure. So things like data classification, our data maturity model, storage, AI, and then holding all of that supporting infrastructure together is, of course, metadata. Kind of the entirety of this presentation is going to revolve around just anchoring on that metadata. We have our, what was it called, supporting beam?
Top beam,
Top beam,
top plate.
top plate for our semantic layer. And then at the very top of the house, our roof is all of the use cases here. And so the analogy is that you can't have each level without the other one. So we can't have a supporting infrastructure without the foundation, and the supporting infrastructure and the foundation need to be completed before we can ultimately execute on these different use cases like our dashboards, analysis, and AI. All right, big question. What is metadata? And metadata is, I think typically people think data about data, but I think a better definition is information that describes and explains data. So this is things like our source system, subject, keywords, our creators, and our owners of data assets. And so let's talk about kind of the main three categories of metadata that we've put together. So we have descriptive, structural, and administrative. So for descriptive, that's context about your data. So, the title of your report, any keywords associated, your description. We have structural, which are the actual physical components of your data. So where's that asset located? What type of asset is it? And then lastly, administrative, which is just the information used to manage your data. So when, how, who created it, and who has access. So what's it good for? What do we use metadata for across the university? We have discoverability, so for having our assets tagged from a documentation perspective, it makes it a lot easier for our end users to ultimately find that data asset. I'm going to go to maintainability, which is essentially providing breadcrumbs for the future for you to reference so that we can maintain that data throughout its life cycle. And then we had to put literacy ability. We made it up, but it felt wrong not to have ability at the end. So just essentially offering our detailed insights into the asset's origins and ultimately empowering our users to use our data assets that we're curating across the university. So who does metadata impact, Josh?
Well, absolutely everybody. So we're going to keep going back to this house, and we're going to highlight different areas that are affected by these different content items. And so when we look at the metadata specifically, we're looking at direct effects on different user types. We're going to look at analysts first here. So this is the house of analysts. Analysts are going to be doing analyses. They're going to be building dashboards, making predictions, and along the way, they're going to, hopefully, for the sake of my job, leverage some enrichment. You're potentially going to use some visualization tools. You're going to look at the business glossary and the data dictionary to find out what data is out there, how to use it. Hopefully, you're going to benefit from data quality information as you're using it. And then we'll talk about the maturity model later as well. So, how? Well, we have this idea that we can make the job of analysts more effective by leveraging metadata because they need to know all these different things about data. So you're going to want to know what it is, who owns it, how to use it, all that fun stuff. But ultimately, when we look at the analyst's role broadly, there's a decent amount of time spent finding data. There's a lot of time spent understanding data, a ton of time spent cleaning, wrangling data, making it usable. Then you're spending a little bit of time analyzing. Hopefully you're doing some documentation. And you might actually have the opportunity to finalize something, and then you can communicate the results. So with metadata, we're hoping that we can reduce the time it takes to find the data, reduce the time it takes to understand the data. You're still going to spend a lot of time cleaning and wrangling the data, most likely, unless you're using the enriched objects. And that leaves you with more time to analyze the data, do more documentation on the data, and hopefully you're more likely to actually finish something and communicate your results. So let's talk about data owners. How are data owners benefiting from the metadata? Well, the owners are responsible for the data that's stored someplace. So how it's stored, where it's stored. We have security, governance around that storage that they need to be aware of and they need to be approving of. The lineage, how the data is being used, where it's coming from, where it's going. The quality of their data, I like to think they care about. Classification, categorization, so information about the data that you might find in the dictionary and how it might be organized. So owners, we're looking at this cycle of data usage. And right now you can't see a cycle because there's no arrows. Watch the magic. So data sources are used to create reports. Now, how does that happen? You've got this black box, right? Someone is doing something. Developers are creating the data sources. How is that happening? What's the tool being used? How's the data being captured? What's happening to it along the way? Who knows? Reports are going to consumers. How are those consumers evaluating the reports? How are they understanding the information? Who knows? So we have all of these boxes where things are happening and the owners, the stewards, the trustees might not have insight. So they're going to want to know, how's their data being used? Who has access to it? Who's actually using it? All that good stuff. So transparency for owners. And now we have consumers. So end products, generally, they're looking at the output of applications that are utilizing data, the dashboards, the analyses, the predictions, any AI tools that might be developed on top of the data. The consumers are going to benefit from a thorough business glossary, right? There might be terms within these assets that need to be explained. They're going to want to know how quality the data is that's being used to create these objects. You're going to have confidence intervals and things like that. How it's classified. We're going to talk about the maturity model, all that good stuff. So where's the data getting its report from? Consumer wants to know. What do these metrics mean? Consumer wants to know. What are the limitations? How should we be utilizing it? Who owns it if I have questions? All right, so data maturity model. This is a fairly new concept, still being ironed out in many different spaces. And this is just kind of be my interpretation of what's been discussed up until this point. So we're going back to the house. Maturity model affects all these things. You keep looking at your watch, so I think we're going to speed up a little bit. All right, technical maturity model. So we're looking at how do we measure the different dimensions of assets, services, systems, things involved in the data landscape. And we're going to measure it across these different dimensions. Let me pull up Dembach. So this is one way to potentially structure these different dimensions for a maturity model from a technical lens. So you have things like quality, you have architecture, you have security, quality of reference data, how much metadata do we have. We can measure all of these things and score them across a scale. And we can take the scores for these different dimensions, you can roll them up, you can combine them in different ways, different assets can be combined, different dimensions can be combined. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to identify where we have gaps in these different areas. Where are we strongest? Where are we weakest? We use that information to prioritize additional development. And ultimately, we hope that we get big scores and that helps to build trust. Or even if we have low scores, there's more trust because there's an understanding of where the weaknesses are. All right, and then similarly on the functional side, we're looking at slightly different dimensions using a different lens. There's going to be some overlap with what we saw on the technical side, but it's just a different perspective. And we're going to use it for the exact same things. And here are some examples. So now we're looking at these more functional dimensions. We have the strategic nature of the data, the usability of the data, the quality of the data again, how well managed is it, which has more overlap with the technical side. But we're looking at it from a different lens. There's different objectives when scoring along these dimensions. Okay, so this is metadata and the semantic layer. So what's the semantic layer thing? Ideally, I would think so. So each piece of metadata and each piece of data itself, or every business system that's being used to create data or process data, we can grade everything that the data is touching, anything the metadata is touching. Okay, so our top plate here, I didn't highlight everything because it affects everything, but that's where it is. Okay, so we're looking at a business representation that's translating complex data into business terms. So we often talk about business analysts and data analysts, and one of the important skills is the ability to interpret the data world for business users. This helps with that. This can automate some of that. We're looking to bridge that gap. It's creating a portal into your data that makes sense with a business user looking at it. We're looking at creating consistent definitions for things, making sure that everything's kind of using the same logic to determine things like KPIs, and ultimately we're trying to reduce how many versions of the truth we have. So KPIs, definitions, metrics, hierarchies, this is all metadata that's involved in the semantic layer. This touches in the enrichment space as well. We're building logical models. So we're creating this abstraction of the underlying data structures that is easier to navigate for users. Also something we do in enrichment. The semantic layer can create a non-technical interface for users to get to data. Right? So if you're familiar with the campaign builder, for instance, behind the scenes, it's taking those filters you're applying and turning it into SQL. This can do similar things. Manages who can see what, so we're looking at governance, right? Not everyone should have access to all the data, and you can integrate directly with different tools. So that's a lot. So where does this live? So we've got data storage, we've got consumption, it's in the middle. Consistent metrics, it's adding that layer, right? So we have sources, we have storage of the data coming from the sources, and then we have our BI or AI tools that are using the data that's being stored, and in the middle we have the semantic layer. So you might have heard of data virtualization. This is aligned with that structurally. All right, so why? Faster time to insight, reduce complexity for business users, consistent reporting. Hopefully you don't have more of that, why do your numbers not match their numbers, and digging into all the details. Everyone's using the same numbers to begin with. Reduce dependency on data people, and then improve governance, trust, and collaboration. So how does this surface in our world? Well, you can see out there are lots of companies using the word semantic layer, the phrase, I guess it's 2 words. Now, a lot of the times, they're defining a semantic layer in a way that best fits their existing product and platform, right? Because that's going to benefit them. Some might expand functionality to include more of what other people might think of as a semantic layer. So if we go to the bare bones, what we can do today, we have Tableau. A lot of people here are probably using Tableau. We're not using web authoring. If we were, makes this a little bit easier potentially. But we can create shared extracts, right? We have all these colleges creating basically the same extract over and over and over. We can have one in a centralized location that everyone uses. You can build KPIs on top of that within a model. We can build template dashboards. All these things can be done to create something that looks like a semantic layer and brings us a lot of the same benefits that a semantic layer would. Some of you might have been involved in the Denodo or Dremio proof of concepts that Kristen had years ago. That was a virtualization layer. That was part of what a semantic layer can bring. Again, it creates that connectivity to all your different data sources. It allows you to build a logical layer on top of it, access restraints, all that stuff. Some of you might remember the SSAS days. So we were building dimensional models. Within the dimensional model, we were building metrics, right? KPIs, standard calculations that you could then apply to all these different dimensions of data. You could cut it, slice it, however you wanted, using the same logic. That's a big part of what a semantic layer can bring. And then potentially with open metadata, we can integrate using the APIs, glossary information, dictionary information, with AI especially, potentially leveraging that to create more consistency across our different assets. And eventually we might have a business logic repo. I'm just going to keep putting this on every presentation I can think of.
All right. So another layer of metadata is in the context of our analytics portal. And if you guys aren't familiar with our analytics portal, it's essentially our one-stop shop for all of our reporting assets across the university. It centralizes across Tableau, Report Server, Power BI, and SharePoint. So essentially it brings everything into one place so that our data stewards or our consumers do not have to know what system to go to find their report. They just go to one place. But of course, as we're aggregating information across different systems, different report creators, different groups, metadata comes into play big time because we're searching. Oh, forgot the house. All right, let's anchor. So for the house, in the context of the analytics portal, we get into all of these different elements. So as I mentioned, it is our one-stop shop for all of our analysis. So we touch our dashboards. It's an application. Some people are posting their predictive models on the portal. So we touch a lot of the upper use cases, but of course we need those supporting elements such as our data categorization, classification, which you'll see in our next slides, how important those two specifically are. But we touch on security, our data maturity model, integrations, data quality, and our visualization tools. So now let's get into what this looks like in practice. So here is our search page for the analytics portal. And so we have thousands of reports in one place. And this is where metadata really comes in. We have tagging and categorization of our assets in the portal so that when you're looking for an asset, you don't need to know the title. We have all of those filtration systems on the left-hand side that allow our users to splice and dice the search results, making a report kind of like shopping on Amazon for a product. So for an example, here are some of our categories of metadata. These are the overarching subject domain. So we have data domain, we have subject domain, purpose, enterprise, level of detail, and then just general tags. So these are the different areas that you can filter for your reports. And all of that tagging is done by the individual who's publishing the report. And so let's talk about what that might look like in this tagging situation. So if I have a report called student enrollment by term, our data domain might be student, our subject domain might be course, as well as enrollment and records. For purpose, we're looking at the performance overarchingly, and it's also reporting up to executives. It's showing both aggregate and individual row level data, so that's why level of detail is both. And then we have our enterprise as academic, and some other additional tags we might include would be headcount, NRC, etc. So, Josh, talk about enrichment.
Yay, enrichment. I'm going to bring this into every presentation this week. So with the enrichment space, we leverage metadata in different ways. One is with the summary sheets. So this is a type of documentation that we create that's intended to be kind of your first point of contact for any of the objects that we're creating. We create short links for them, so even getting to the documentation is hopefully pretty easy. So if you're looking at the SA term table in the warehouse, you can go to links.asu.edu/SA term and get to the summary sheet. The summary sheet's going to have some technical details. It's going to have links to the more detailed documentation about the asset, its development, how to use it, all that stuff. It's going to have a descriptive overview of what it is. It's going to tell you what the grain of the object is, what the scope is, how the population's defined. It's going to have some other helpful nuances in case there's maybe some intricacies broadly that you should be aware of when using the object. So for instance, with our term dimension, we have lots of different versions of current. And some relative counts and things like that are going to be explained within this document. It's going to have the different types of objects that might be involved. So I say SA term. We also have SA term SCT, SA term SSNP. So we have our change capture, our simulated snapshots. All that's going to be documented in there as well. There's going to be sample queries for each of those object types to kind of give you an idea of how you might use it. And then we're going to have a change history for the object. So if columns were added or renamed or logic was changed, there's going to be a historical record of that. And then if there's any other links you need to know about for the project, it's going to give you an opportunity to get to our feedback form, our request form, the list of all the other objects, our portal page, all that good stuff. Data elements, this is kind of the middle layer. So you're going to get a little more detail here. You're going to have pseudocode and logic for the individual columns. You're going to have all the information that goes into the data dictionary is essentially developed here first. We're going to have some lineage information. So this column's created by applying this logic to these source columns. And you're going to have object level tabs and column level tabs. So here's an example of the object level for our student class table. You can see links, description, use cases, our Slack channel, the warehouse Slack channel, the grain, data sources, source tables, upstream, all that good stuff. Here's a very small column level page, but you're again, at the column level, you're gonna get descriptions and notes, sample values. Does it have nulls or not? Is there a null equivalent? What data sources are used for each column? Is it a primary key column? What's the data type? All the dictionary type stuff. And our SQL docs. So this is where you can get all the way into the weeds. You're going to see over on the left there, we have different phases. So you can look and see historical point in time. What was the logic at that point? How is it changing over time? You can see all the different objects. So our base table, the SCT, the SSNP. If you want to know exactly how it's being made, this is a good place to find that. And we're working on ERDs. So ERDs kind of show how our different objects are related to each other, either with the cardinality, so one to many, many to one, required, not, and then how you join them, and that could be joined, this object can be joined to this object, or you can specifically say this object is joined to this object using column A, column B.
All right, now let's get into open metadata, which Josh kind of teased earlier. So if you guys aren't familiar with open metadata, it's our centralized area for defining our data assets for at a source level. We're trying to launch in January, so it's coming up very soon. We're targeting our three main source system, the enterprise data warehouse, operational data store, and our analytics user database. And so the idea there is that all of the descriptions, tagging, classification, everything related to metadata around those three main source systems will be just in a one-stop shop. And so as we're talking about metadata management, it touches quite a few things on this house. So we're talking about data quality, lineage, classification and categorization, our data dictionary, security, who owns this data, our business glossary, some enrichment work, and then ultimately it supports a variety of different use cases. So let's talk first about our business glossary. What is it? This is a sneak peek of what it looks like in open metadata. They define common business terms. these terms are not repeated within the data dictionary, and essentially it provides guidance to analysts and developers about general object choices. Not to be confused with our data dictionary. This is what an asset looks like within open metadata. All right, let me get through all those animations. So our data dictionary essentially gives us information about the object itself, how it can be used, what our descriptions are, classifications, categorizations, who owns it. And I think the biggest one is descriptions. So this is giving our analyst primarily all of the insight that they need to know to how to use our data at the university. This open metadata provides a platform for visibility across a multitude of data assets here. So the data dictionary is a key role here in giving us a catalog of the data that exists at the university and how it can be used. And I think there might be some questions around what the difference between a business glossary and a data dictionary are. So from a glossary perspective, this is much so more leaning towards the business perspective. It's non-technical language, it's focused more so on concepts, and it's relevant organizationally wide. Whereas the data dictionary, we're talking about the technical metadata. So if I have a schema or a table, a column, what does that mean? So these are the field definitions and formats. They're database specific and they're much more focused on the analyst. They are not more like you're not going to have a dean go in there looking up what SA term means. Another thing that open metadata provides us is profiling. So profiling is essentially understanding the context, structure, and quality of our data that we have. So this includes things like our data types, any missing or null values, what percentage they're null, any duplicates, and gives us some ranges of our data values and our distributions. So ultimately this ensures that our data is accurate, complete, and reliable. This piece is really harping on that data quality pillar. And then data lineage. So Josh kind of touched on this with ERDs, but from a perspective of in the context of open metadata, we can see how data is moving throughout our system. So we start with that SA term table that Josh was talking about earlier. You can see how it's used in various other views, as well as how it's being used across the university in dashboards. So from a developer perspective, you can understand the downstream impacts of any changes you're making in the table itself. From an analyst perspective, you know where this data is coming from, how to use it, and how it's been transformed. And then from a data steward perspective, if I own SA term, I want to know how my data is being used and where it's being used. So it gives me a lot of insight into the path and transformations this data has taken throughout the university. And kind of getting back to our ERDs, there is also the capability in open metadata to identify primary and foreign keys, which we can ultimately use, as Josh had mentioned, to derive ERDs, and that's kind of the end goal here. So with that being said, we're going to transition over to AI and ML, which really touches a lot upon open metadata. So the foundation, it's at the top. It touches everything. Do you want to talk about it?
Okay, so there's going to be a few different AI presentations at this conference, and I think all of them are going to, if you really listen to them, think about them, there's going to be an emphasis on the requirement for the data itself and metadata, describing that data. The models aren't any better than the data that they're utilizing. So AI, traditional ML, however you want to look at it, there's some things in common. They're going to use data in different ways. So you have to train the model, you're going to test the model, you're going to process the model. You have to have quality data for all of those or you're not going to get a good model. Now, you don't just need good data, you have to have the right data, so appropriate data. So you get into like model bias and things like that. But also, if you just use a column that doesn't mean what you think it means, your model's not going to tell you what you think it's telling you. So understanding what data it's using, how it's supposed to be used, what it actually represents, how it was created, who created it, all that stuff is important to having a good model. So metadata, you get your glossary, your dictionary, your lineage, the relationships, the logic that's used, standards around using it, rules for using it. Um, the metadata is going to tell you what the data is, how to use it. It's going to explain it for you. It's going to tell you, ideally, if we think about the maturity model dimensions again, things like quality, um, should I be using this data for this purpose? We're looking at creating AI-ready data by leveraging metadata, and ultimately the metadata provides the map and directions for the data itself. So if you think about how you as an analyst would use the data, the model's not going to be able to use it any differently. You still have to know what you're using, how to use it.
All right, so as we've talked about, the data, this is kind of the flow that the data goes through its journey throughout the university. So we're starting with the raw data from the source applications. This could be something like Canvas, Workday, Salesforce. It's then sent to an S3 data bucket. And from there, we have our ETL work, or at an enterprise level, through a tool called SnapLogic. That ultimately is what's pushing our data into our data storage. So this is our, as I mentioned earlier, our enterprise data warehouse, analytics user database, or operational data store. And once we have our data stored in an accessible way for our analysts, that's where the analysis actually comes into play. So where our analysts are either doing some transformation work with something like Alteryx, where they're querying with dbeaver, or where they're doing the visualization work, whether that's in Tableau, Power BI, Report Builder, or Excel. And then ultimately, once your analysts have completed their job of their end product for consumption, it goes towards three main kind of pillars. One is that analytics portal, which I talked about earlier, which is an easy platform for your end users to consume your data. But then laying on top of that, we have things like enabling our student success based on predictive models that have been built off that data that these analysts are creating. And we also have AI with our AI acceleration team. My friend Josh is on. I'm not sure if you guys know him. And overarchingly, overlaying on all of these different avenues and stages in this data journey is, of course, metadata, which is, open metadata is one for data, but there's metadata at every single stage. Okay, now that we're at the end of the presentation, you've heard all of the wonderful things that metadata has to offer. I'm sure you guys are just chomping at the bit, wondering, how can I contribute? Right? Raise your hands. Are you excited? I'm going to pretend everyone's hands are up. Thank you. So let's get into how you can impact. So from a analytics portal perspective, as I mentioned, metadata for user experience. As a report owner, you do have the ability to add those tags to your assets. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a few that are automatically added by our synchronization system, so content type groups in the source system, but where you as the publisher come in are the subject domain, data domain, purpose, enterprise level of detail, and keywords, which are all report specific. There's two ways you can do that, either through bulk tagging or individual tagging. For bulk tagging, if you have multiple reporting assets that have the same tags or a level of same tags, you can go through and do that all in one push with the bulk tagging capability. And then for more niche reports, or if you're doing reports one by one, you can go and tag your reports at an individual level. Ultimately, I just want to anchor on you tagging your reports is what ultimately makes finding reports a lot easier across the university. So your participation here is really important for report visibility and eliminating duplicates of work. So for those of you who have already tagged, thank you. And I'm sure everyone in this room will tag going forward. So thank you. And then from a open metadata perspective, as I mentioned, we're aiming to launch in January. You guys can begin to contribute terms for the business glossary, for the enterprise data warehouse, operational data store, and we're working on the analytics user database template. For our first launch, we are just aiming on those three main source systems, as well as developing a business glossary. But in the future, the idea is that we can expand our integrations across other systems. So if you're interested in learning more about open metadata, there is a table in the back of the same hall that we just had the opener in. Come by. For some context, what we're targeting for our first launch, we want to completely document our top 20 tables. These are them. So if you are the steward of any of these tables, looking at you, we will be here to help. We have a student worker who is working alongside us in farming all of that content. We are happy to pair with you to define those content. If you already have existing documentation, kudos, and you're able to send that to us, and we will translate that into open metadata. And again, stop by our table. So with that being said, that's the end of our presentation. Are there any questions? Sure. So right now, open metadata is only bringing in the tags that are created at the Tableau source system. There is not an integration into the analytics portal. So your way for classifying reports is still through the analytics portal. Oh, that's not good. We'll make it quick. For the bringing in the Tableau assets, a lot of it was for the lineage perspective. So in a later iteration, the hope is that we can integrate with the portal to have that, final end tail of where that report is residing and looking at the Google Analytics so we can tie everything back. But yeah, for the first iteration, it's not going to be in open metadata. Yeah, I would not do your report tagging in open metadata. That does not stand for the data assets. So enterprise data warehouse, ODS, AUDB, all of your classifications should still be done in open metadata. But from a report perspective, keep that only in the analytics portal. Yeah, I saw you had a question.
So, end of the day tomorrow, I have a presentation, going to go into details on all of that. And the conclusion is they're not taking our jobs anytime soon. Um, but I have noticed some terms seem to work better than others, but it's also model dependent. So like, what's the base model you're using? Different models can have different like tones, and they're based on different training data. We have an instructor who says they have different personalities. Um, but usually it's just testing. You have to try something. If you don't quite get what you want, you try something else until it works. The length of things, now you're starting to get into like chunking and retrieval methods and how vector databases work and how that gets combined. And that gets really complicated. So it depends. Yeah.
Any other questions?